we're going to start. Thank you everyone for coming to the Mid-America IT Connect event. This is our 15th presentation of this event, and my name is Vijay Kunkimala. I started this IT Connect event, founder of this event almost about a year and a half ago, and I've been giving presentations on cutting-edge technology. I've been lucky to have many volunteers who have been subject matter experts in many of these cutting-edge technologies like SEO, web analytics, data science, and all this stuff. So today is no exception. We have with us an enterprise architect and a strategist, Tariq Ayub from Avnet, and he's going to be talking about intelligent automation. Thank you again, everyone, for coming.
Awesome, thanks. I have to stand here, so that's the final decision. Vijay, I have to stand here. So I'm going to have you be my clicker.
I can click.
It's a pretty long cord you can probably. All right, well, good evening. I can't get my time straight because I flew in from New York and I'm still confused about the time. I went from California to New York back here in 3 days. So it was a rough sort of travel. But anyways, thank you, Vijay, for the introduction. Let me see, where do I start here? How many of you have an idea of what intelligent automation really means? Or I want to make this a conversation as well, more than just a delivery of content. Anybody have any thoughts and ideas of what comes to mind when you think about intelligent automation?
I think self-learning is the top part of it.
That's one part of it, yeah.
AI and automation.
Yeah. So I mean, you're right. So it's a mix of using intelligence to remove tasks and activities that perhaps can be transferred over to low-value workers. That's really what it means. Anyways, that's what I want to get. Let me start with a little bit about myself. I think we missed that earlier. So I have been an enterprise architect for over 20 years, strategist. Spent a lot of my time in a lot of companies. Microsoft, more recently, I was part of their global team around leading the retail and the consumer packaged goods space as a CTO. So got some very interesting insights. I'll tell you something about when you work for a tech company like Microsoft or Google or Amazon, and yet you step out, the world seems like 15 years behind. Because at the end of the day, what these companies are doing are making the future. So I got an opportunity. I was glad that it was exciting to be part of the front-end innovation that's happening in a lot of these great companies. Got to see HoloLens and how that's being done. I got to see at Microsoft the AI work that they're doing and how they're transforming some of the companies. And if you've actually heard Satya's most recent speech, you found on YouTube, right? It really brings into perspective where they're orienting themselves. So got some good experience over there. So, but right now I represent Avnet. It's a strategy organization that we just focus specifically on intelligent automation and how to get that adoption with our company. So that's what this is. Let me. I think I said that I'd like to make this a little more conversational as opposed to content. So if you have specific ideas, thoughts about your experiences as we go through some areas, please let's hear it so that everybody else can get a chance from learning from those things. So let's go to the next step. Here's the 3 pictures I put up there. Everybody knows what they're. First one, Alexa. In the middle is some virtual bot, right? That you're having a conversation. The person who's holding the phone is having a conversation with. And the last one is obviously the self-driving car. So the interesting thing here is they all have this aspect of intelligent automation built in, right? The question that I get, when I'm talking about intelligent automation, where's the intelligence and where's the automation? I think it's fairly obvious for the groups over here that the intelligence and Alexa is in the AI setting, obviously there. But the automation is really what happens when Alexa processes what you're saying, right? So for example, if you have Amazon if you're using Alexa, let's say, to order something through Amazon, as an example, right? The order to cash process that's being executed in their data center is the automation that we refer to. If there are manual tasks that perhaps need to be executed when a product needs to be taken from a warehouse and shipped, and the use of robots in that particular process is the automation that we refer to. So the interesting is, okay, what about the car? Well, the automation is the driving part of the car. The learning is the process through which it understands directions and sends information back to its AI engine around what it's experiencing, and perhaps go through the process all over again, right, through its learning process. So just an idea of what this is and how intelligent automation is really coming together. What I wanted to focus here really is AI is a topic in itself, right? It's probably broad. I can probably spell out a day of just AI. Automation is a fairly big topic, but what we're seeing in the business world is the combination of two, where you combine them effectively to drive value to enterprises, right? So that's what this is. How many of you here are experiencing or working with AI technologies today? Show of hands. And how many of you have you looked into the integration of AI into more modern business process engines or anything like that? You have.
There's software that's been developed to read contracts and extract the important parts of the language in the contracts, such as if you're looking
text
at
processing, yeah.
Yeah, if you're looking at a loan, maturity date, principal amount, interest rate, things like that, covenants. It's able to extract them for you. The automation that takes place is you don't have to read the document.
Yeah, that's true. So these are use cases that we're seeing a lot show up, and very insurance industry is a big user of this type of activity. The financial services world, healthcare is using that quite a bit. So there are these industries that have traditionally been using the workforce to do these kind of tasks are now looking at how to take this paradigm and deploy it inside the enterprise. Okay. So I mean, this was a very consumer-focused view, but the same thing is happening inside the enterprises as well. All right, so let's go to the next slide. Another example. So you know what I put this up here is the combination of intelligent automation, just as an example with the self-driving car. Anybody see what this picture on the left is with the robot building a bridge? Has anybody seen that before? So this is a robot that works 24/7, right, collaborating with an AI engine to help him design this bridge. All right? The human is collaborating with the AI to provide guidance on his vision. The AI is working with the robots on converting the plans to a design, and the robot can build it, right? And that product that they're using inside is a 3D material. It's a 3D printed bridge. What was interesting here is that it's the combination of the human thought, the AI, and robotics coming together to drive what we're referring to as intelligent automation. So this is actually a bridge being constructed in Amsterdam. It's very interesting, actually. I happened to know one of the engineers who was actually on this. They're doing fabulous work. And on the right side, we throw it up there. It's another form of intelligent automation, right? With the surgeons or physicians working in concert with the AI, which is being integrated into the robots working on precision surgery, right? So the AI over here is imaging being received by the physicians, but also by the robots to make decisions and guide the physician on recommendation on what they should be doing. So it's a combination of both the intelligence of using AI, the robotics, and the human element. So what's interesting here is that, and this is what we're seeing in the real world as well, is how can we offload these types of decisions that are repetitive or perhaps can be done with more precision with less error to over to an AI, but then use the robotic capabilities such as an arm or in some cases, I'll talk about it later, a software, a virtual robot to execute that, right? So that's what this example here is how you do the collaboration. This is happening quite a bit these days as I work with a lot of companies. So next slide. Any questions or any comments? I think I heard something. All right. So the other thing I want to bring into perspective is when we talk about this intelligent automation, right? What's really driving it? Everybody's talked about digital. It means 80 different things to a lot of people. We don't even know how it's going to end up, but people are defining it the way they are. But the more important thing here to notice is that there are three pillars that fundamentally drive a need for intelligent automation. You're getting into connected products, whether it's IoT-led or smart products like the self-driving car, right? You're getting into connected products that are producing a lot of information, right? That information is being used for both discovery of exactly how usage happens, but also being used for further evolve the design of these products, right? You're getting intelligent operations, the ability to introduce smartness into your operations. Let's use operations as an example. Customer service is an aspect of operations, right? You go to a hospital and ER, that's operations. So how do you look at receiving the data and service your customer in a more intelligent way? So smart servicing is an aspect of intelligent operations. And lastly, there's customer centricity, which is that everybody now thinks about putting the customer at the center of the universe and building a model around that using customer journey maps, right? So these three things are collectively driving a need for intelligent automation because it becomes the fabric how you bring these three pillars together. If the demand for certain services in a company gets so high, it's just impossible for the human labor or workforce to keep up with that demand. So it forces you to move in the direction of intelligence and so automation. The intelligence is something that is now being overlaid because the cost of compute, the amount of data that is produced using the big data analogy is such that it allows you to introduce intelligence into that automation. So that's really the paradigm. I wanted to bring that up because one of the things we do as I talk to companies, we're redefining how work really takes place in organizations. We call it the future of work, right? Is work going to be the same it is today with people getting hired, talent plans being developed, and then processes put in place to run your operations inside a company? How do you empower these workforce? Do we need different skill sets? So there's an entire aspect of future of work. In fact, it's a topic in itself. Maybe if that's something anybody's interested in, we can talk about that. How do you look at the next generation enterprise? That is, it was motivating some of these intelligent automation conversations as well. So let's move to the next slide, and I want to get into how we ended up here, just so that we're all on the same page, right? We started with this whole labor optimization zones where everybody was working with files or many people working together. This is an aspect of the future of work, by the way. And over time, we have a human nature, we always have a need to optimize things, right? So over time, people started optimizing. Hey, can we put in scripts in these computers? Can we write macros in Excel? Can we automate some of that? And that's the tasks getting partially automated, right? As we move forward, we got into business process design and what I would call codified business processes. So where we're headed now is in the towards the right side, what is known as autonomics, and eventually the cognitive is how do you effectively do work using cognitive thinking. So the journey continues this way. I think eventually, and I have a slide at the end, that we're going to end up with applications or architectures that perhaps will be codified using AI, right? That is the trend, with how do you make your business processes so adaptive and so declarative that your AI is fundamentally writing the app code that delivers the kind of, delivers the service that your customer is seeking, take into consideration the market demands and which environment you're operating in. That's the direction. In fact, yesterday I saw, this morning, Google released their Google ML product, which is starting to write applications. Okay, it just got released this morning. It's in beta, the experience in testing it out, but essentially your application developers are leveraging that to write core constructs of your business rules. And the focus of the application developers is the assembly of this, but more importantly on the user experience. And everything else is being executed through that. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing you saying is that eventually the employee will not be necessary.
Yes, the evolution of work. That's why I was calling it, yes. So that's a good point, yeah.
Yeah, so how is that going to affect the economy?
That's why I said I can have a whole different conversation on the future of work. Yeah, so that's one of the slides. It's something that is a concern, right? Saying, how do you now take skilled employees that are proficient in doing the tasks they're assigned today, right? They could be tasks that are not related to delivering applications, but if you're doing checks, manual paper checks, or talking to customers, or things that are repetitive in nature, people you hire on a constant basis, perhaps that has a lot of churn, right? What do you do with them? Do you reskill them? Do you redeploy them? Do you train them? Do we have the right training programs? So there's a lot of conversation happening there, which is how do you now look at economic view of reskilling and redeploying talent based on the emerging space, which is the further right you go, from your perspective, the less demand you will have on certain skilled workers, right? And that's the nature of this beast. So one of the other questions I get asked, and you can move to the next slide, is, Vijay, you want to move to the next slide? Is how do you define intelligent automation, right? So I wanted to basically set the context, but this is really the three big pillars of intelligent automation. You have process automation, which is all about orchestrating tasks and workflows. Whether we talk about ordering something from Amazon, talking to somebody and filing a claim, booking an airfare or a ticket, they're all business process automation areas, right? So that's the orchestration side of it. There's a second pillar which is now emerging, which is robotics. Things like chatbots now emerging as the new user experience to interface with these systems, or task bots, which are what I would call the automation entity, which is taking over the work of somebody who perhaps may be doing manual labor, right? So those are the task bots, right? So that falls under the robotics category. And then there's a third one, which is artificial intelligence. Everybody knows what that is. And I will get through some aspect of AI, but collectively, this is what intelligent automation is. What's happening today in the marketplace is there's a big demand, and this happened in 2016. Robotic process automation came up as a vehicle to fast-track innovation and digitization of the company's processes. Anybody over here looking at RPA projects in their organization? It's become a big thing these days. It happened last year, and all of a sudden it's accelerated to a point where people or companies are finding it very effective to deploy RPA, and there are certain platforms and techniques to do that. Introduce robots into the organization by using RPA, and then taking it further by extending into AI. So the example you use here about text processing was an example. So I have an example here in the claims, for example. I was helping an insurance company in Ohio. Probably you guys know who that is. Who was trying to optimize claims in a healthcare space. So a lot of complexity shows up when you file a claim for the normal route, right? You got to check the documentation. You got to connect with the providers. If there was an exception scenario, what do you do? Maybe there was a handwritten note that came through from the physician, or perhaps there was an image provided to manage the payout, right? How do you now look at all these different factors previously that were done by people and ensure that the claim is processed and delivered to the recipient at the right time? So that was where RPA was used effectively. And what we did was we took the process automation side, which is the claim process, right, decomposed it into the bits and pieces that need to be automated, or perhaps where we need to add efficiency. Introduce robots in there, and I'll talk about the platforms that are used in there, that essentially took the data, looked at it, and we had codified rules that determine if it meets a certain set of fixed rules, then it perhaps need to be executed a certain way. So the rules that are perhaps supporting the orchestration were being executed by robots. What it did was it removed the, about, I would say, 8 people from one process.
So how did it handle the adjudication process? So when the claim goes in, it's rejected, how are you responding to that scenario?
Yeah, so that's a good point. So there's an evolution here. I think there's a slide here that says, how do you now hand over from a robot to a human when it determines that it's no longer able to process a complex scenario? And that was the case. So the handoffs were effectively done through the process itself. This is a complex scenario, right? A complex scenario perhaps is challenging, and in some cases needs to follow some compliance and regulatory aspects, right? So we would do a handover to a educator, right, to handle that scenario. Now, where we were headed was, and I'm still working with these guys, is how do you now bring in the AI component to now execute that complex claim in a way which perhaps makes it even more, less dependent on the.
So even so the robots were even handling the ICD-10 codes.
Yes.
And the only time you had a handoff was when there was an issue with adjudication.
Yes.
Then that's when the human was inserted back into the process.
Yes. Process automation is not a new thing in the HR space, in the insurance space, but that's what it was doing. So really 3 building blocks. So let's just go on. Everybody knows that we talked about. So this is the journey that most of my companies I work with follow. I can't even get out of here. I'm gonna move this way so they can hear me. They can hear me without this thing. I want to show you that typically this is the journey that a lot of companies go. Embark on, okay, when they're looking at automation, right? You have RPA over here, which is where the introduction of robots are being, where the robots being deployed to handle tasks, just like simple tasks, things that can be automated by just providing static rules. As you go further up, right, you start getting into cognitive services, where you start making more decisions on complex scenarios. Eventually, you're going to end up, which is what I was referring to as a machine-based enterprise, which is the AI fundamentally running your enterprise, taking into account the context that I described earlier around what's happening around the environment, what's happening inside the enterprise, what are the customers asking for, what's the market doing, and then responding to that context accordingly. So this is what most companies that I've talked to haven't left this. Literally, they haven't. They're doing a lot of work in this and this, but you'll see a lot of pilot programs, POCs, not sufficiently integrated into the organization that allows you to see large-scale impact. It hasn't happened yet. I think there's a lot of, to your point, concern about what's really going to happen when, what's happening to my job. There's protectionism going on. So there's a non-technical reasons for that. But a lot of companies are still in this space here, very hard time. And a lot of these are big companies. Now, I will say that companies who are emergent, right, or the newer companies who are solving targeted problems are doing a lot of that work, far more integrated into their enterprise. Whether you take Uber, Facebook, any of these guys, right? We're up there. So this is the journey, right? Let's get down a little bit more on who these business process players are. Wow, he agrees. I missed the deal with that one. Anyways, continue. Yes.
So is there anybody, actually, can we go back just for a second? Who is the furthest along in this chart, and how far along are businesses in general? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, I do.
Is there people at the far right of the chart?
No way, not even close. We're saying at
So
least
where are they dropping off?
15 years before we even get there.
Right.
Most companies are just starting on this here. They're deploying internally bots to handle their repetitive tasks.
That would be manufacturing, right? They're probably leading the charge as opposed to.
So manufacturing was that's not a new concept for them. They're
Right.
deploying robots, but these are virtual machines. These are virtual entities. They're not physical beings. They're essentially processes or applications being deployed that know how to execute certain tasks. So let me give you a real example here. This executes well in this scenario. If you are, let's use the healthcare as an example. If a claim comes in and you have to orchestrate the execution of your task across 6 different screens and 2 different systems, right? What do? You have 2 options. You can go back and invest in a program that's going to modernize that whole process, right? Or they initially look at RPA as a way to deploy a robot in the same chair, not physically, but in the same machine or the same desktop that does what that person does. So it goes and opens up a screen, does this, enters this piece of data, moves it from here to here, sends a message here, picks up the code, sends a message. In fact, they would actually pick up, dial out, make a call, and you'd be talking to a chatbot and then end the process. That's what these guys do. And it's going on right now.
Okay, so now, is there a feedback from that? Because, I mean, if you have a bad process in place and you automate it, it's still a bad process. Even if
Yes, a great point. Yes, that's a great
Go
point.
back to modify.
Yeah, so what this also does is, this is where companies are finding a lot of value, is they collect analytics from this. Because now it's fundamentally software, you can extract insights on how well is the process being run. How many times do we get scenarios where this system is being used? Is it an exception scenario? Do we need to invest in modernizing this or not? Right. So the analytics plays a big role in determining what should happen and is the efficiency sufficient for its current state. So that's the answer to your question. But anyways, I haven't seen anybody go past this. This is 2016. That's when it just started. They haven't even done. There are companies that are still trying to figure out, okay, so what's going to happen to our workforce? They stop there. How do I create a business case for the savings I'm going to get here, because I'm going to have FTE reduction at the end of the day, and redeploy to do business process changes. So there are some companies who are taking this and integrating AI. The guys who are further along are the financial services in that space. So AI specifically for text analytics, right? For image recognition, learning for image recognition, also learning behavior. When this guy calls, he does this, so learning behavior on customer behavior, okay? Somebody had a hand up, okay. This is just, I don't know why I had the slide in there initially. It was supposed to give you a context of how many processes I find that are like completely not automated. That's the opportunity, but it's a pretty big opportunity. This is your point. Not a lot of companies don't even have stuff automated today. All right, very easy. Everybody knows what process automation is. I just wanted to quickly go through each of those 3 building blocks again to show you what our thinking is and how things stitch together. Okay. So everybody understands what automation is. We have analyze, automate the workflow, and then you monitor it consistently to see how it performs, right? There are very specific players that have come up, I don't know if you can see it over here, that are now leading the charge in the new business process automation. The top one over there is called Appian. I don't know if anybody heard of Appian? Okay. There used to be business process engines, like IBM used to be in that space quite a bit, and then Oracle was in there. Appian has now become a leader in this space because they do what they call no-code business process automation. Okay? And they're doing so much integration with AI as well. Okay, so what's happening in the marketplace is these guys who are seeing themselves as being threatened because of disruption are now trying to bring in this new technology. So, business process automation, wait a minute, I need to have a bot guy, so let's bring in the bot guy. Oh, wait a minute, we need to have AI, let's bring in the AI as well, right? So it's getting a very interesting market. So anyways, these are the big players who are now in the intelligent automation or going forward in terms of business process automation are becoming the key players, right? Again, you guys can have a look at this offline, but I'd encourage you to look at Appian. All right, so really quick on your point is what kind of processes are fit for automation, right? There's a very specific methodology that I've used and we've deployed. You go through an analysis process of like, you know what, how many people are working on this process? Is it 3 years? How complex is it? How repeatable is it? Is it simple? Is it, can it be, is it going to change very often? So a number of things are viewed to determine exactly, can we replace a process or a person? I have to use that, a process and a person with a bot, right? These are some of the aspects we look at, right? I'm just going to rush through this in the interest of time so we can get through some discussions at the end, right? Another example here, this was a purchase order process that we developed. Simple, 1, 2, 3 people looking at a process deployed using a bot, right? Where this process here, the matching of the quote, the updating of some system, and then the CRM was done using a bot. And the savings were significant, obviously, but we did have to answer this question about now what do we do with those people, right? And that was a HR conversation about redeployment and skills and talent development, right? So that's where the robotic part of it comes into play when you talk about automation. So this is what's interesting. there are specific technologies in play right now, of which these three, UiPath, Automation Anywhere, and Blue Prism, are the key leaders globally. They're the one, every company you talk to, they'll have one of these three. There are others here, like Word Fusion, coming into play. Anybody heard of Pega Systems? Okay, so Pega is playing a role in there as well, right? But some of these are becoming niche players. The reason I wanted to bring this up, you can see here what they have in terms of deploying. You know, they give you a framework for deploying bots, a full development environment where you do it's like a studio development environment. Like you can code, you can actually write your own code and integrate, right? They give you a complete operations data center management capability. A bot is nothing more than an app. You have to monitor it. You have to ensure its risk is managed. You got to secure it. You got to do all these kind of things, right? That same thing happens here. You got to do. They give you the RP analytics. We talked about the process, how effective they give you that to understand the process efficiency, and they give you a number of different things, right? So if you go in the market and you hear about, hey, somebody's looking at an RPA program, right? More than likely you'll end up with one of these three platforms. Okay. So I personally think the ones who are the leaders in this space are Blue Prism, and the reason is because they are working with Watson for integration for their bots. They are deployed. They can be deployed in Azure, in Microsoft Azure, or in AWS, right? And they're fairly. They can pivot on either side. They can be completely declarative, which is I'm going to do a drawing screen, draw the process out, and click a button, and a bot gets generated. Or you can actually write code in C# or any language you want, and leverage open source libraries, whatever you want to use, to create one, right? And then deploy it in their framework as a platform. So they're the ones. So they're based out of the UK. Great company. Again, founded in 2016. Let me give you some statistics here. These guys are a 17% company. I'll tell you how big RPA has become in 1.5 years. Their 2017 revenues were close to $60 million. 17% company, and all they do is RPA deployments, right, across the board. But it's becoming a very big thing because people are finding that it's a fast track to automation and then eventually AI. All right. So there's that. So I thought in terms of bots, there are two types of bots. There are task bots. We talked about that. They get deployed and they execute work for replacing a human being, right? Replacing, they can be similar to Excel macros over here. And then there are these other things called chatbots, and you've heard of those, right? I want to bring this chatbot perspective in because there's a consumer side that's coming into play over here, is when we talk about robot, there's the enterprise side, which is working with automated business processes, and there's the chatbot, which is now becoming the new user experience, emerging user experience, right? So rather than click and run, you can have conversation. So both of these task bots and chatbots fall in the category of robotics and are being serviced by those guys that used earlier. However, going forward, there's a huge ecosystem of bot producing factories and frameworks out there, right? I'll let you guys experience where they are. I mean, everybody's having, you got third-party bots. You in fact have bots now that are dedicated to specific verticals. The healthcare guys understand exactly what it means to deliver patient experience. The financial services guys, and you've heard about the wealth management side of it, which is where you can have robots advising you on your investments and things of that nature. And then you have, this is an interesting one. I was in China 6 months ago. My God, you have to see the amount of digital savviness that those guys have. In fact, I had an article that I shared on LinkedIn where the acceleration of AI and these chatbots is overtaking where US is today. I mean, it's really, WeChat is a product that they have, if you've heard of it. WeChat is the equivalent of yes.
WeChat's equivalent of WhatsApp plus Facebook plus Twitter plus PayPal. Plus
oh my God, it is so integrated into almost every part of their life. It's unbelievable. I was in a cab and I very easily pay using WeChat, right? I moved from there to a grocery store. Well, guess what? I just pay with WeChat. And all this time, that trending is being done, and then of course you hear back about other options that are available to you based on your journey for that day. And in fact, the only country I know so far who can conduct their life every day with no wallet, zero. You don't need a wallet. So, and that was very interesting to me. Anyway, so there's an entire space around the bot world under the category of robotics that is now coming up, and it is the next generation user experience that is being used, that is being developed. Any creative folks over here? Okay, so in the digital studios that I've been working in the past, there's a shift, right, in how you do engagement with customers. And this is one aspect of it that is now considered as how do you now interface, what language will you use, how will you deliver the same experience through this type of capability. So let's move forward. So there was an ad, so now let's look at this is the third pivot, right? So I said business processes being automated using those platforms. Let me just recap quickly. We have the bots being introduced, right, which is the automation side of it. And this is the third pillar, which is AI, which completes the intelligent automation capability as a whole, right? Somebody asked a question, what exactly is AI? I had to put this slide up there because AI means a lot of things to a lot of people. I'm not going to get into deep, I'm not a data scientist, but we'll talk about the different tiers here, machine learning and deep learning and how that's playing a role in the intelligent automation space. Anything you see here that perhaps feels, they didn't talk about this? Can you see? You'll see that it says machine learning that's such a big space, right? So it's everything in machine learning in a way. And if you notice, they all build on each other. It's not an exclusive or mutually exclusive scenario, right? You have machine learning, you have deep learning, and neural nets, which is what the three big things are, in my opinion. And then what happens is you essentially build on that. So natural language processing builds on, leveraging deep learning, speech recognition, leveraging. Even in fact, neural nets and in some cases deep learning. So, is this? Tell me, you guys, who was it? Somebody asked me about AI, what it means. What is it that you think that is perhaps not here, and you thought it was inclusive of some other category? Let's get a dialogue going.
I think some of the things I've seen where this is targeted to go to is the self-learning part of it, where the automation, you might have mentioned it maybe as self-programming, but I think the effort where it's actually relearning itself, and I think some of the examples I've seen it kind of in games is like chess playing, those kind of things right now in games. I'm not sure if there's really commercial applications for these things. But I know gaming, I think, is an area that's really trying to leverage this.
Yeah, so the gaming space is probably one of the more advanced spaces that's leveraging the AI capability, right? There is an aspect of automation there as well when you start getting into chatbots, right? But more importantly, right, everything I've seen so far has been spot deployments of these capabilities. Some of them in that graph that you saw earlier, very early stage, right? Google is probably the guys who are trying to do this, more effectively. But there's a whole. I'll talk about it towards the end. There's a whole. I would say there's some concerns coming out around ethics and workplace, and a lot of these things that are showing up now around AI. Go ahead.
So I used to work for a financial institution which was implementing a lot of these bots, scripted bots, and there was a question about the human aspect of it. What do you do about employees and things? What I've seen is actually like a stepping stone to that. A lot of it that I experienced was you first replace the employees with contractors, especially offshore contractors, which then leads to the automated bots, and you then don't have the HR impact of that loss of manpower. You're not really, these companies were not really losing HR employees, staff. They were just downsizing offshore staff, which was a very easy for them process.
Yeah, so I think in that case that's a band-aid, in my opinion, because you're still not addressing the issue around what happens when 60 companies of that kind in fact change their hiring model.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
This was a AR HR process to minimize the legal impact.
Okay. Yeah, so I think that's what's happening here. Maybe we should have a dialogue towards the end of this around where people see their implementations of AI and how they're experiencing AI. But let me just quickly go through some parts of it. I don't know if we need to spend too much time on the ML. How many folks over here are very well acclimated with how ML works and in terms of the, at least in automation? Yes, no, maybe we'll just go through briefly over it and then we can just talk about it. Okay. Keep going, next. Right, so people ask me questions around, and this was it, hey, what's deep learning and what's machine learning, right? Maybe you guys know, but I thought I'd throw it in there saying that we all know that AI is not a new construct. It's been going on for many, many, many years around how to have machines think like or replicate the human mind or cognitive capabilities, right? So deep learning is nothing more than an extension or build on, is a subcomponent of machine learning. It just happens to have due to the availability of certain compute, right, and that compute to process large scale data, right, they're able to execute or implement certain algorithms that perhaps can deliver much more fine-tuned results in the predictive space than just traditional machine learning. So anyways, that was a question somebody had asked, and I said, you know what, maybe this is something that folks still are trying to question, where does deep learning come into play? How many folks follow over here NVIDIA and what they're doing in that space? There you go. So NVIDIA's GPU, my God, you got to see some of the neural nets that they've deployed in their data centers with for some of the neural networks. I think it was, I don't know, you probably can clarify, I think it was like a 15 layer or something like that, neural net that was processing, I don't know how many millions of images. But anyways, that's what this is. It's just, let's move forward. All right, you guys all familiar with the types of learning that you have supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and then there's reinforcement learning, basic stuff that I think, I don't know, I wasn't sure of how many people have experienced over here, but bottom line is when we talk about the AI side of it, there's various types of learnings that are happening. Most commonly used today, in any example I've seen, is the first one. Almost everybody's focusing on the supervised learning. The reason is I think it's just easier to implement. And they've democratized a lot of the AI tool sets today. Microsoft has done that, MXD, Amazon is doing that, Google has done that, Watson, big one, right? The challenge with this one is obviously we get into a lot of issues around the quality of information or data, right? This requires that you have examples of previously made decisions, right, available, so you can actually use them as benchmarks for your training sets. And even today, when we go to your example of how do you hand it over, right, the data is inconsistent and perhaps doesn't have a sufficient quality. So one of the areas we look at is how do you get the precursor to this ready, which is your data pipelining and making sure that you have sufficiently good quality data.
Can you speak a little bit, you may talk about this later, how companies are protecting themselves against lawsuits? Initially, you showed a slide of physicians at a Da Vinci machine, and a man goes in for cancer removal of his prostate, and decision support on the AI side indicates that there should be a prostatectomy. So they remove the whole thing. But that's maybe not the intended purpose. Now that's an extreme example. But how are companies protecting themselves against lawsuits, and are companies even insurance companies even looking at insuring companies who are deploying this AI? What's the risk profile look like? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, that comes up all the time when we talk to companies on this subject, right? Frankly speaking, there are a lot of these companies so early in their scenarios, they are being extra conservative in kind of decisions they want to hand over to an AI. They just are not comfortable doing that, right? Or in fact, in some cases, I don't think maybe I'll get too deep here, but there's a concept around the types of algorithms people are using for machine learning, right? And there's a whole slew of them. I don't know if you guys know any of those. There's standard clustering, blah, blah, there are many different algorithms. And sometimes what people do is they will force fit a certain model to a problem space, or sometimes it's underfitted. This is getting into data science. But bottom line is they're being very, very conservative on what decisions they want to hand over. Now, this is where a lot of the industry is trying to put emphasis on is what kind of governance can you put around decisions and deployments of these technologies, and at what exact point, if we discover a concern or risk factor, do we do a stop, hand over to a human? Hence the intelligent automation point I was bringing up earlier is it's not there today where a decision a process will be followed through by an AI completely. At some point, there is this handover saying, hey, I don't know this, I'm going to hand over to you. I'll give you another example of an automation scenario that happened with Airbus, the aircraft company, right? When was it, 6 years ago or something, when they had the flight that was going from Brazil to Paris was lost in the Atlantic, right? And I studied it quite a bit from this perspective because they do have a lot of intelligence built into Airbus. Airbus's philosophy is that the AI or the intelligence that's built into the product is far superior than the human, right? Boeing's philosophy is the opposite, saying we will never rely on the automation, we will always make sure human decision precedes or overrides AI, right? They have the opposite philosophy. But in that scenario, all decisions will be made by the AI itself. And they did have what they call is a cutoff, right? That simply says, when this situation happens, hand over, boom. So what it did in that case was, I'm relating the story here because what it did was it stopped and said, I can't handle this, you do it because there are too many complexities showing up over here, right? That is the model that is currently being used today in most of the companies that I work with. They're monitoring it excessively. They're just being very conservative. I don't know if a long-winded answer, but it kind of gives you an idea that they're not ready to make those kind of jumps and leaps.
And just one other question for you. So in your example of the insurance company and processing claims and automating that with AI and robots, in the event that the company is charged with insurance fraud, Medicare, Medicaid fraud, is it a viable defense to say the robots did it?
I have a slide on that. It's called ethics here. There's an aspect of ethics that's showing up over here. So how do you blame a machine for in fact, I think the government of China has introduced this in their policies of how do you deal with AI as part of a government introduced artifact. Here, it's a larger conversation. In fact, it's been going on right for a while. How do you now deal with decisions being made by AI that perhaps may violate certain principles of our ethics, code of ethics, right? Or in some cases may not be in alignment with the way we conduct our social life, right? So that's an open question. It hasn't been addressed. Again, we're so far early to the stage, but these are proactive issues that are being brought to the table by the committees who are addressing this. What was it? There was something you brought up that was interesting. The healthcare. So I was with a company, yes, in New York, who has the largest deployment of physician-assisted robots, apparently. So what they do, it's essentially what they do is when a physician makes a decision around a prognosis or something, they validate with this product whether the decision is in alignment with what it should be, right? It's one of the largest deployments. And what's happening is they're realizing that they've overly been dependent on this anymore, so to a point where the physicians don't really validate it.
So what have they done? They've implemented this with the electronic health record?
Yes, they've integrated with EMRs, they've integrated with the pharma guys as well, and so there's an ecosystem integration requirement that essentially brings this to life. Otherwise, it's hey, I don't know, you said this, I don't know. So it requires a larger ecosystem integration. For recognition, you can see how demand energy is being used. People have done this for some time. It's been, so I just wanted to show that they're still a core part of the intelligent automation space. They're acting as the foundation, and this is how robots are connecting back into for the purpose of automation. Next slide. Everybody understand, what kind of solutions are typically used for machine learning. There's machine learning and there's deep learning, two different kinds of scenarios. Today, machine learning is a primary use. Primary is the only one actually used in the intelligent automation space. right? Because you need this supervised data to actually have them learn the scenarios that are they're being applied to. I was working with in fact, that's in deep learning. So let's move to the next one. Right, deep learning is the one that's actually interesting to me. I was working with very heavy use in image processing. I was at an event, at a healthcare event. I don't know if you've heard of them, Radiology Society of North America, RSNA. They are specializing in medical imaging. And what they do is they establish standards for communication between different healthcare participants. And one of the standards they're now putting in place is how do you now look at AI as a way to have a dialogue about image recognition and what's happening in the X-rays or the CT scans or anything like that has emerged. So they're working very closely with Google to determine a method around deploying services that can communicate using a standardized approach, right? It was interesting to me because I was at the conference, and I would say a third, all of a sudden, from between last year and this year, a third of their showcase space was all about deep learning. Companies popping up from all parts of the world, and in fact, looking at medical images. There was one company who had achieved a level of success and deployments in hospitals for breast cancer research, and they were 98% of the time recognizing through deep learning engine that they built, right? The nature of the tumor, right? When it was not even detected by ultrascans or anything else. So just looking at, so they were doing a lot of this work. So I think deep learning is going to be a big piece of the automation space, especially when it comes to the processes that require these complex scenarios and are looking at images or looking at artifacts that need to be evaluated, and then multi decisions need to be made. So that's a big piece that's showing up now in those platforms that I talked about earlier, UiPath, and they're now moving in this direction by integrating deep learning services into their platform. So that's really a high-level view of deep learning. Can we go forward? Right. I talked about GPU. You know what is getting there? It's because of the computational power that's available that you can actually do a lot of work around deep learning, and the training sets are similar, by the way, just like machine learning, since it's a subset. But just at a high level, I'm not going to get into the details of the whole space. We can get into in terms of what happens in deep learning. Anyway, so let's move on to the kinds of things that we're looking at. There's so many different. By the way, the interesting thing about deep learning is much more closer to the way the human mind works. It's cognitive thinking, essentially. How would you train a child, as an example, to go through its learning process? That's what's happening with deep learning. And one thing that I was researching, and then we were talking about it with some folks at our university, is so are we at some point going to basically replicate the human being? Like, yeah, well, that's what's happening, because as a new generation is coming up, the engines that are being deployed, or who they communicate with, the Alexas of the world, or Siri, or Google, or anybody else, are essentially learning behavior over the years. So the acceleration of cognitive behavior and learning of that is faster than we think. So yeah, it's going to be fairly soon where we are fundamentally getting into fairly highly skilled cognitive things. I don't even know what to call them anymore. But anyways, kind of things we look at in terms of deep learning. Image analysis is what I talked about, very big in automation because of the kind of benefits it provides. Let's move on. I think I talked it briefly. This is an example. I don't know if anybody's interested in architecture, but how do you really go through the process of deploying AI with services? And there's an entire space we can get into for those folks who are interested in deep architecture level conversations and what's happening with the cloud, right? How do you take advantage of serverless compute and deliver the integration of data and the services built around that using AI? So you're building a more intelligent system. Who's anybody over here leveraging a lot of these platforms in their companies for any particular?
Yeah, the
Azure?
Yeah.
Are you okay? Are you looking at the various modern services, serverless?
We're using every single part of Azure.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, very few companies are actually for large-scale projects. And And
Yeah,
imagine-
for the, I work at a car company. And so we're using that.
You can be more specific on that. He's so vague.
I was in Microsoft, so I don't. It doesn't matter. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Okay.
Yeah, so we work with Microsoft's our primary partner, so we do our cloud platform with Microsoft.
Yeah. So yeah, this was. So there was this, and I have a few other blueprints around Microsoft Cognitive Services and how they're used. Bottom line is, when we talk about intelligent automation, this is not in a more holistic manner, right? Let's move on. A lot of players here are playing in the all this space. I think everybody knows this. The other different services. It's getting fairly dense out there. You will see some sort of a consolidation happen soon. But anyways, go on to the next slide. I'm running out of time here. We talked about three things here. This is what I wanted to talk about. These are the big three things I hear now. Because all of the other stuff around AI is fairly understood. That there's advantage. Workforce. How are we going to address the next generation of workforce? What are we going to do about the redeployments? How do we put in place the skill set where people can now look and get hired for the types of systems they're building, right? What happens when you don't have skills? How do we go through the training? What happens in that case? The idea of Upwork or just-in-time talent is a big thing, right? So do we need to even go in the direction of hiring people? There's that space over here. My God, security is such a big piece here. People have no idea on what to do with security, and we can get to bots. All right, you gotta have they have identities, and they have to be managed just like any other identity. People are having issues around hacking and cybersecurity, all of that. Big issue here. In fact, I think cybersecurity and security is in itself a use case for AI, and you guys know that, right? A lot of that being used over there. And the last one was this ethics thing. What happens when an AI makes a decision, to your last point, that is not directly aligned to our thinking, right? So these are the three building blocks we have that are back in the intelligent automation space. Last slide I have over here is what in fact looks like the generation of blueprint that we're building at a company right now. We have all these sort of like engagement type. These are what we call engagement interface, the next generation of user experience, whether it's machine vision, or chatbots or assistants, or in this NLP thing is coming out big. But more importantly, here's your dynamic engine, which runs your business applications, and on the right is your infrastructure and your machine learning and AI capabilities integrated. Bottom line is you have exhausts coming out here, ingestion coming up, so this whole space keeps augmenting itself or adjusting itself, and we call that, it's the adaptive enterprise. I zoomed out because there are a lot of components in here that I think would not be appropriate for this session. As you go deeper inside, what does it look like? We get into Azure PaaS type serverless compute and event-oriented architectures and all of that inside there. This is all the Appian thing where you actually are able to declaratively find out what should the rule be using a cognitive engine and push a brand new rule into this engine over here without coding anything, right? So there's a lot of this happening that we were doing in several companies.
Are you seeing anything in law enforcement with predictive analytics as to when and where the next crime might take place?
Yeah, what's the name of that movie?
And how Minority Sources?
Minority Report. That's the one. Yeah, I think it's a good conversation because there is work happening. When I was at Microsoft, we were doing something with New York in that space, but I think it borderlines the whole concept of ethics. So when you talk about a crime, the definition itself was not clear. So there is predictive stuff. What they do is they say, hey, there's a higher chance of probability. Here, Mr. Law enforcement officer, go check this out. As opposed to saying, I will take it upon myself to issue a warrant for X, Y, and Z, right?
I was thinking even off the law enforcement, how about terrorism?
Yeah, that's what's going on. And that's been going on for some time in the U.S. government, right? So what they do, data mining is happening, and they're always looking at anomalies, which is known as anomaly detection techniques. So that stuff is happening today on higher probability risk assessment, so predictions, right? What I'm saying is with intelligent automation, you get to the next stage of that is from predictive to prescriptive, which is now I'm going to tell you what action you need to take. And by the way, that action you need to take will not be executed by the human being, it'll be executed by a robot. That's where it's headed.
There is John Connor.
You'd be surprised. No, so that the bots guys that I showed earlier, that's what they're being trained to do, right? Financial, like I mentioned, financial services, healthcare, insurance are the big industries that I've seen this become really evident. I think the travel industry is coming up big, the airline space especially, because they see an opportunity to renegotiate their union contracts, which I don't know if it's going to happen or not. But anyway, so there's that. I just mentioned that these are the 3 building blocks for intelligent automation. You got to look at them in tandem. It's not let me just look at AI. AI will solve certain parts of your business. You'll have business processes that are automated. They'll solve certain part of your business. What we're doing is bring these 3 dimensions together, hence the term intelligent automation. So I'll leave it at that. I mean, really, it was a broad sort of an overlay of what's happening out there. What are we engaged in? I'm sure you guys are experiencing some bits, pieces here or there. Tell me what else can we talk about, and I'd love to have a dialogue.
What are the relative costs of some of these projects?
Yeah, good point.
Are they multi-million dollars? Are they coming under $1 million?
No, some of them depend. So, good question. The costs are relative to the scale you want to be transferred. But to your point, I don't have an answer, but I can have a hypothetical answer on this. All right. The car story is really interesting. I don't know if you want to share anything, how AI is being used from your experience. You don't have to specify the details on the car itself, but use cases.
Well, right now, for sure, like the AI stuff is for the self-driving, right? The self-driving is all done through AI. So like a lot of the stuff determining, ahead of you what are the objects, it's all done through
That's through
computer
AI.
vision.
That's what Google is doing. That's what BMW is doing. That's what Volvo is doing.
That's what
Uber's doing it.
Right? So Uber's like self-driving is algorithms are using that. And as a matter of fact, like Uber opened up a new office like last year in Toronto, and they hired a University of Toronto expert machine learning researcher professor to lead the Uber self-driving effort, in Canada.
Yeah, I thought they were partnering up with different companies to do the self-driving. But it's a good point on the auto side. Again, I think it's also, if you look at where AI is being used, machine learning, right, part of AI, is all about just predicting behavior. Self-driving car is probably one of the examples where it's much more complex. But everywhere else I see is all about, hey, how can I recognize my customer? What have they done? Can I understand? Can I make it personalized? What is the likelihood that this will trigger a response if I do X? That's where it is today.
So the stuff that that we are doing, at least. So I work for the technology side of BMW, and so like last year I gave a talk here regarding about kinetic cars and machine learning, and so like what we're doing is, there's an operation that does self-driving. We're not directly in that particular area, but we're doing more stuff with like journey management. So we have machine learning algorithms that determine, for example, where is your home, where is your work, how long will it take to get from work to home, or when should you leave for your next trip? If you're going to your next trip, where you should refill your gas if you don't have enough, gas remaining, or recommendations of certain fuels along the way.
Next slide. So you bring up an interesting point. The area that I got very interested in is the entire aspect of automation. And you think about business processes as just execution of tasks, right, or workflow. You can apply this to your car example also. The correlation of that with the smart cities is huge. That's coming up, right? Energy efficiency, environmental, smart, green, self-driving cars, impact to all the local authorities, all that stuff, right, is an extension of the 3 pillars here.
There was somebody who gave a presentation, I think, Pushkin, you gave a presentation of somebody going to an Amazon store, and they actually don't, there's no cashier, you just walk in, and using the facial recognition, the Amazon, the software, and you just pick up whatever you want.
Yeah.
And you walk out.
So they're trying to do this at Whole Foods. You know, they're trying to do this at Whole Foods. In fact, at Microsoft, when I was there,
Now with stores, they just arrest you.
yeah, they walk you back,
Yeah.
and it's the robot
Excuse me,
picking you up.
sir, you forgot to pay.
Maybe that's where the robot would be.
Yeah.
No, but that's a good point. At Microsoft, we used to set up a retail sort of a playground, right? So it would be really like a mall. We took a warehouse, it would be a mall. You walk in as if you walk into a mall, and there'd be different stores, hypothetical. But we did this, right? So as you walk in, it recognizes you, profiles you, categorizes you. We all of a sudden are segmented into a category because you have a certain demographic, right? So from a marketing perspective, it's been going on for some time. Anytime you go somewhere, right, there'll be things showing up that perhaps subliminally are trying to push certain information to you, right? Maybe they have your history and they'll give you discounts on the spot. All that stuff is happening. I did that with the airline world as well. Same thing. Predictive analytics being used for customer engagement. This with payment system is actually a big piece of this, is an extension to the, it's not so much predictions as much, that's more of an IoT-ish kind of scenario where you walk out and then you can, based on who you are, because they recognize you, right? Well, then because they know who you are, it's part of your loyalty probably, or that's where you have your payment system set up. Maybe it's an Apple Pay, I don't know. But a good one. These are all emergent. But again, like I mentioned, they're all happening in the customer consumer marketing scenario. That's the biggest. The article, by the way, have a look at that. It says the U.S. is leading only in one area, self-driving cars, whereas China is leading in a lot more areas. All right, I got to jump, but.